Hey guys, welcome back to another video in our Roblox Studio Introductory series. I've been getting some questions from some of you lately about doing some advanced um, bit of trickery with your model creation, questioning on some unique styles of parts that you're trying to create and not quite sure how to do that. Um, and I wanted to introduce a topic tonight that I'm really excited about. It's something that I use very heavily when I'm creating game content. It's going to open up a lot of doors for some creative builds and solving some challenges that you might have encountered in trying to create some models of your own. I think you're really going to enjoy this. If you're brand new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. This series that we are doing right now is a progressive series. Everything is building up from previous videos. If you are new to creating your own Roblox content or you're new to Roblox Studio as a whole, I suggest you start back at the beginning of the series and get caught up because everything is sort of moving in a progressive way, building up from previous knowledge. And I'm going to be referring back to remarks and things that have been taught in previous videos. So to prevent yourself from getting confused or anything like that by anything that I'm saying, uh, I do suggest going back and starting from the beginning. For those of you who are a little bit more experienced with Studio, this is a video that you can pretty easily jump right into. So I want to throw that little disclaimer out right away. But the the concept that I'm going to be introducing today is something that if you've ever used any other CAD software, 3D modeling software, you're already pretty familiar with it, maybe not by terminology, but certainly by practice. And that is something known as CSG, or Constructive Solid Geometry, which Roblox Studio will refer to as solid modeling. And you will see that is the next group in our model menu bar here that we're going to be covering. So we're kind of working through as we go. So today we're going to get into these buttons here, and we're going to be able to create some really neat things that I think you're going to have a lot of fun with. And at the end of this video, guys, if you end up coming up with something really cool that you want to show, please share it with me. I would love to see some of the stuff that you come up with and some of the neat ways that you apply these concepts. So don't be afraid to pass along uh, anything that you feel like sharing with me. I'd love to see them. Let's go ahead and dive right in. To get started, I'm going to drop a block in here and I'm going to introduce you to exactly what this is. Um, this particular tutorial is going to be a little bit different than other ones that you may come across covering this topic. I'm going to go much deeper into how this is used and some of the ways that your parts are affected, and I'm going to cover some of the headaches and confusion that you are likely to encounter ahead of time, because this is something that can be a little frustrating sometimes, because the way that your parts are going to behave is very unique, as opposed to some of the other stuff that we've been doing so far. So this is going to be much more in-depth than other similar tutorials that you're going to come across, for good reason. So I've got two parts here, and you'll see in the workspace they are individual parts that are individually managed in terms of appearance and size and shape and all of that. What solid modeling does is allows you to join parts together. to create much more complex parts. There are some things to know about this, and that is when you are creating these joins, you are actually changing the geometry of the parts. Um, Meaning, so right now we have a block, so we have 6 sides. We have top, bottom, and the 4 sides here. Very simple shape. When you start joining these parts together, the geometry is modified so that now you end up with actually surface here, 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 here. It creates a single piece comprised of the individual parts that you have created and selected for your unions. And let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of these parts. And I'm going to come up here to Union. What you'll notice now is in our workspace, those 2 parts have now become a single part. The icon for that part has changed to show that it is a union part, and it's also renamed it to Union. And you'll also notice that our appearance has changed. We no longer have our studs. So it actually has stripped the studs off. Everything has these smooth surfaces. And what we now have is a single part containing this unique shape that we've just created. To demonstrate some of the changes that this takes on, I'm going to undo, and I'm going to duplicate these parts, and I'm going to drag them off to the side here. So we now have 2 sets of parts. In one set, I'm going to drag a selection. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to group them. Okay. So we have one object that we can grab and move, and it sort of treats it as one part like we've covered in previous videos. But the properties of the individual parts have been maintained. The surfaces haven't been touched at all. You can expand this out. You can select individual parts. You can scale and make whatever changes you want to them. And it doesn't alter the model itself. This is really just a way to group things together. In this set over here, creating a union, we don't have this expandable state where we can go in and select the parts individually. The surfaces have been modified. They're all smooth now. And we don't have the ability to come in and scale the individual pieces of that union. So there is a very big difference in creating a union and creating a group. There's some additional transformations that this goes through that you need to be aware of as well in determining if a union is the right option for you as opposed to a group. Okay, and a lot of those changes apply to the behavior of the appearance of the joined parts, and also in the way that it handles things like scaling. So you'll notice over here, if I select a single part within here and I scale it, it scales no problem. The other part's not affected. If I select the group and I try to do the same scaling, we now have a uniform scaling. And you'll find the same is true if I individually select multiple parts and attempt to scale. It behaves the same way, uniform scaling. Unions are going to take on that same behavior. Okay, so even though we do have one part, it's going to behave as if we have selected the individual parts that create that union. And what I mean is, when we go to scale, we are bound to this uniform scaling. which is good and bad at the same time. It's good because it allows us to work in a very large scale and build things really big and then size them down, and everything will be uniformly scaled to match, which is going to make complex builds much easier to create. Um, but it does also mean that if you later determine that you need to, change this, like maybe this part's sticking out a little bit further than you want it to, you lose that level of control. Now you can go back and break this union up and make your changes again. And to do that, you use separate. Now separate returns the parts back to their previous state. It breaks that union up. So we can then go in and make our changes and then recreate our union. Now, another thing to note about unions, and I'm actually going to undo and go back to how we were. I'm going to duplicate these. Let's recreate our union so we have all of our comparisons in order here. Now, as mentioned, the creation of a union alters the appearance of the part, and you see that with the surface changes here. If we wanted to create some individual appearance changes on these parts, let's make this one red. When we go and create our union, whoops. Oh, come on. There we are. When we create our union, our surfaces are changed, but our brick color is not. And so what we end up with in the union is this combination of colors. This introduces a new property that we're going to take a look at for this union that tells the union how to handle those kinds of color changes. What I mean is, if I want to come in here and change this union to, let's say, dark blue, it didn't have any effect on the union. So even though our appearance change was made and it's applied, and if we deselect and reselect, you'll see that it's still there, it doesn't actually change the union's appearance. And the reason for that is because there is a new property that has been added to this part called Use Part Color. And this determines whether or not to apply this color to our union. So if we come in and we check this box, that color change is now applied to the union, and we can change it to whatever we want to. And if we deselect, it's ignoring this again. If we come over to this one instead, you'll notice that that property is enabled. And if we make a change, it takes that change. The reason for that, Roblox Studio is smart enough to determine that when we created this union, both of the parts had the same color. And so when the union was created, it enabled this for us because it determined that the union that we were creating used a uniform color in its parts. And so it enabled this for us. In this one over here, it recognized that the parts both had different colors, so it deselected this so that those colors were maintained. So it does do that extra work for us in determining how it should handle that property. You will notice, however, I'm going to separate this and duplicate. Okay. I'm going to recreate the union here. Now you will notice if I set this to pebble, and now oh, come on. Sorry, there we are. Okay, so now I have them both selected. Now when I go to union, so we have different colors and different materials. When I create my union, that material is going to apply across both parts now. So the brick color is maintained, but the material overrides the other parts in that union. One thing to be mindful of is that the order that you select those parts in before creating your union is very important. If I separate these, now I'm going to select our blue part first, and this part has the smooth plastic material. Now I'm going to select our red part, which has the pebble material. When I create this union, they both have smooth plastic now, and that's because I selected the blue part first. So this part has now taken priority. This becomes our dominant part in the union. And you'll also notice that the intersection here, blue is overlapping red. On our other part, red is overlapping blue. And that also is because of the order that these parts were selected in. So if I separate these, if I select the red part first and then the blue part, in my union, the red now overlaps the blue. So the red part, being my first selection, is the dominant part that determines the final appearance of the union. And you'll see that in more complex shapes as well. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to bring it over here. I'm going to demonstrate this further. I'm going to separate these parts. I'm going to duplicate this one. I'm going to make this one green. And we're going to make this one pebble. We're going to make this one grass. And we're going to keep the blue one as smooth plastic. So now we have 3 parts. And yes, you can union more than 2 parts together. In fact, I'm going to change this material because they do have a very similar appearance here. Let's go with granite. Okay, so they're a little bit more obvious. Now, if I select our blue part first, and then I select our 2 other parts, when I create the union, as you can see, blue is now overlapping both. And they have all 3 taken on the smooth plastic. If I separate these again, I select green first, and then our other parts. Green now overlaps blue. They've all 3 taken on green's material. And because blue was the next one that I selected, blue now overlaps red. If I undo that, let's select green, and then red, and then blue. Now red is overlapping blue. Green was the first one that I selected, so green takes dominance in this overlap. Red was the next one that I selected, so it takes dominance in this overlap. And blue is the last item selected, so it just sort of fills the space that's left over. So again, the order that you select things is very, very important to make sure that you are doing it in the order that you want in order to achieve the look that you're after. Now, you can also join parts that are not only different size and placement, but different shapes as well. So if I duplicate this, I'm going to turn this into a ball. I'm going to bring this down. We're going to make this red. Now, when I create my union, we have a complex shape consisting of multiple types of shapes. And you can do this with wedges and cylinders, whatever you want. There's another type of join that you can create, which is where this technique really becomes very powerful. So I have my block here. If I duplicate this block, I'm going to raise this up just a little bit. I'm going to scale down my sides. I'm going 2 studs on each side. So I have this smaller block sitting inside of this larger block. One really cool trick that we can use is this negate button. What this does is it negates this part that we have selected, creates a negative part. You're going to notice when we click this, the appearance of the selected part changes. So that part is now red, semi-transparent. The surfaces have all been changed to smooth surface, and the part itself has changed. What this has actually done, and this is apparent by looking at the buttons here. So if we look at this one, so we have union that's enabled, separate is not. On this one, union is disabled and separate is enabled. What this has actually done is it has created a single part union, but it's created a negative part out of that union. And what that means is that when we now union this to another part, this is going to create a negative space. You can think of it as sort of a cookie cutter. So it's actually going to cut itself out of the part that it's joined to. Let me show you what I mean. So I have the negative part selected. I'm going to select our other part. Now when I create this union, it's actually cut itself out of the other part. And this is true negative space. We can actually, in fact, I'll show you. This is not just for appearance sake. We actually have created a cutaway. Oops. Bear with me for a moment here. Let's do this. Just giving myself the ability to get my character inside of there so I can show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to run this. So now if I come over here, I can actually jump down inside of this part. So it has completely removed that area from this part. So what we've created is a complex shape. So the geometry itself of this part has changed. We've created some additional sides, and you know, if you're familiar with 3D modeling, you know, triangles and vertices and all of that, we have modified the geometry of the part as a whole. Now there is some limitation to that you need to be aware of. Because we are manipulating this geometry, we're actually creating more for Roblox to not only render and and manage and things like that, but to apply its physics to and everything. So it does create some additional work on the game engine. And because of that, you'll find that if you cover your world with a bunch of really, really complex joins and shapes, you are going to affect the performance of the game. So if you are very heavily using these in really complex ways all over your map, you're going to actually increase lag. And Roblox is aware of that. There's not really a whole lot they can do about it, because it is, it is something that is going to have an effect on performance. But they've implemented a limitation to your unions to help kind of keep that under control. And last I checked, that was a limit of 2,500 triangles to a union. So if you just go completely crazy and create a whole bunch of really complex shapes and things like that, and you go to union them together, if the result is going to end up with that union consisting of more than 2,500 triangles, it's going to give you an error and it's not going to let you create that union. And that's their way of trying to say, hey, uh, this is going to affect performance, so it's not something that you really want to do, so we're going to kind of pull back on the reins. You can obviously get around that by creating multiple unions and so on and so forth, but just be mindful of that you what we've created here is not anything major, and most of what you're going to create is not anything that's going to be apparent in its effect on the game. But if you are really just going nuts with it and creating some very detailed shapes all over your map, you could very well affect your performance, so be mindful of that. Now, another thing is that unions, as mentioned, can be made with parts of different shapes. And the same thing applies to this negate property here. So if I create a block, and I duplicate, change that to a ball, place the ball down inside of here. Now if I negate the ball and then join it to our block, that ball's shape is now cut out of our block, leaving us a bowl. So you can already see where this becomes a really powerful tool for modeling. And you can do some really neat things with it. So I'm gonna drop a cylinder here, and let's rotate this way, and let's do some uniform. Well, no, here, let's just go ahead and do like we were. Like this, sure. Actually, a little bit smaller. So we're going to negate this. So now we have two negative parts and our solid part. When we union, we now have a single part with these cutouts. And these can overlap, so I'm going to undo this. I'm going to duplicate my cylinder, and I'm going to rotate it. And now I'm going to select all of these and union them again. So now this overlap has created a pretty cool little cutout here. There's a lot of really fun things that you can do. Let's just show show another overlap here just for fun. Negate this. Move this over here. Now we'll create our union. So as you can see, you can create some really unique shapes with this. Do some really cool stuff with it. One thing to be mindful of, just like with our unions over here, they do maintain the appearance properties, at least with regard to color, of the individual parts. So now what happens when we start applying that to our negative parts? Let me show you. We do end up with a very unique effect. So I'm creating a duplicate, changing that to a ball. I'm going to bring this down inside of our block here, scale it down just a little bit. Now, if I make this ball red, just like we had over here, now I'm going to negate the ball, and then I'm going to join it to our block. Now watch what happens here. That cutaway space preserved the color of the ball. So just like how we have in these parts here, where the color of the parts is maintained, the color of the ball is still maintained, but only where those unions intersect. That can be good or bad depending on what you're trying to do. And just like before, you can come in here and check this box to override that appearance. Uncheck, and we're left with the individual part colors. So if I separate, I'm going to remove the negation on this here. If I actually, let's have some overlap. How's that? I'm going to duplicate. We're going to allow these to overlap a little bit here. I'm going to change this one to green. I'm going to negate both of these. Now I'm going to select green first, then the red, and then the blue. The area that the balls overlapped, because they're both negated, has been removed. So the order that I selected in was green, red, blue. The fact that the red was the second block selected, or second part selected, doesn't matter in terms of the intersection between green and red, because that space has been removed entirely. So there is no overlap like there was in the case of our three-part block here. However, the blue has taken on the color of both. Now if I separate, I'm going to select blue first, and then I'm going to select our negative parts. The color still applies here, and that's where the negative union is a little bit different than our regular union here. The color override behaves very differently when you are removing space from a part, in that it ignores that selection order. So we're not dealing with an overlap like we were here. We're actually dealing with a physical cutaway. So don't let that confuse you. When you start dealing with these complex shapes, they behave very differently than a regular shape would, and so just kind of be mindful of that. When you're creating these, that you are going to come across some rather interesting properties that you're probably not familiar with yet. and I wanted to make sure that I pointed these things out ahead of time so that you're aware before you start diving in and creating these unique shapes. So we are now at 35 minutes, guys. I could keep going on and on and on with this subject. I'm actually going to um, end this here. I'm going to introduce part 2 on this particular topic as my next video. We're going to do some cool things with this approach here and start diving in and creating some builds using this concept in ways that you're probably already considering, but I'm going to show you some really neat things that we can do and some shortcuts to save you a little bit of time in constructing your builds. So I'm excited about going forward. We're getting into some really cool stuff. I hope you're just as excited. I hope you've learned a lot today. I've thrown a lot at you, but I hope it's been helpful. Please do me a favor, drop a comment, like, and subscribe. Share your feedback. Let me know what you thought. Any questions that you've got, I will do my best to get them answered as quickly as I can for you to get you rolling with your own content creation here. And again, anything that you manage to come up with from my videos, I would love to see it. So go ahead and share those with me. I would be very happy to take a look and give you any feedback or anything that you might be looking for. So thanks so much for following along, guys. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video. If you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe so that you are notified when that video drops. So until next time, happy building, guys.